what I think is an interesting way to look at this is that a habit and a ritual are actually the same thing. They're just happening on a longer time scale. So I might have a habit over here, right? Enter the living room, get that cookie, get my reward. I might have a ritual where I'm like, hey, my friend comes over, he spends time for the weekend, and then we have this whole little dance of activities that we do. This ritual is also a environment arising, certain behaviors happening on the way, and us getting a certain reward or punishment. The problem is just that this timeline is much larger. So it's harder to track whether that specific action that we took is actually related to that reward, because so many things are happening in the meantime. So I think this is also why it's much harder to study, for example, the impact of rituals, the impact of longer term habits, but that doesn't mean they are not important. Quite the opposite. I would say that they are very important, maybe even more important than small-term habits, because short-term is instant reward, but usually also very fleeting, whereas long-term might be much slower to get that reward, higher peak, but then also the length of it lasting can be much longer. So right over here, we still have that long-term reward. And that might not even be linear, right? Maybe I have a yearly ritual, like I do my yearly reflection, for example. Or maybe you have a once-in-a-lifetime ritual. Maybe you've tried psilocybin mushrooms in a traditional setting, and that might be a huge peak experience. And then afterwards it sort of comes down, and you're like, okay, that sort of like happened, and then like half a year later, boom, all of a sudden you get like another reward, and then you get another reward, and just like that, all of these are rewards. But by the time that this one over here comes along, you are no longer linking that to you taking this action, to you doing that review or going on that psychedelic journey. These two things are very far away from each other, and I think that makes it difficult to build rituals, to build longer term habits, but that doesn't mean they are not valuable. Okay, so then what is the ideal way that we can move forward with this information? I think the best thing to do is to use short-term habits to stay motivated, right? We get our little reward bumps just like that, and that just feels good. And as we are doing these short-term habits, we can layer them into these longer term things we're doing. And as we do that, we can layer them into even longer term things that we're doing. So we're using the short term to get motivated for the medium term, get motivated for the long term. Perfect example within a notion of life is, of course, the review cycles, right? We do our daily review, then we do our weekly review, our monthly review, and our yearly review. And it takes, by definition, a full year before we get to see the results of the first yearly review. But by layering all these things together, over time, we start seeing a lot of value. And once again, as we discussed earlier, the best way to do that is by linking our long-term stuff, vision, to SMART, to milestones, to actions, linking these all together and having these short-term actions with the short-term rewards, using that to stay motivated for these longer-term things. Now, an important thing to keep in mind here is the risk that we might encounter is that the reward of this thing is so high that afterwards we start feeling a little demotivated. And this is something that I always notice when I'm recording these videos, right? It takes a lot of effort, a lot of energy. Then I publish them. It feels really good. I get a lot of responses. I get like a lot of dopamine. Then afterwards, that sort of wanes. It goes down. And that sort of refine my motivation. So a high peak of reward can also be dangerous. And then the other point that we talked about earlier is confusing the reward. For example, I might have been working out for the past 6 months, and I look really super fit. Now, at this point in the summer, I decide to go out for a few drinks, and at this party, I meet this really gorgeous girl, and that's like such a great experience that in my mind, I'm now thinking that going to parties and drinking gives me this super pleasurable experience of meeting this attractive girl. Whilst in reality, maybe a large part of that was actually me working out all this time, looking fit, becoming more confident, having higher energy levels that led to this result. So we can confuse certain rewards with the behavior that is triggering it. So that's another risk that we need to be mindful of.